the writer, director, producer of Breaking News, Breaking Down. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm just really excited to be here at AOF. Breaking News, Breaking Down is really a story about how storytellers can be affected by the stories that they tell. And it really delves into the issue of trauma and, in many cases, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Because the other thing about data is it's not just how we are affected by trauma. We deal with people who are affected by trauma in much worse ways than us, and we've got to learn better ways of doing that as well. We've got to learn to be more human when we deal with people, not the vultures of the press.
Generally, we think of soldiers or perhaps firefighters, police officers, paramedics, the first ones in, the ones who run towards an incident and not away from. Well, journalists fall right into that category, and in many cases, what happens with them is they become so immersed in the story, they can be deeply affected. And this is something that it was a very personal film for me to make because of what happened to me after 9/11. I witnessed the jet going into the Pentagon, and I was surprised at my reaction. I'd been to Somalia, a war zone. I'd covered the Northridge earthquake out here. I'd covered tornadoes, every kind of violence you can imagine in terms of murders, homicides, shootings. And I'd always been incredibly resilient. You know, it was difficult covering these sorts of stories, but after 9/11, I went into a deep depression, a major tailspin, and I didn't really understand what was going on with me. And I thought that it was just me. But this journey, and that's what this really is, one journalist's journey, that's what this film's all about, really kind of introduces you to other people who were impacted by similar stories. David Hanshu, who was in New York, Ground Zero. In fact, the building basically came down on top of him. We also talked to John McCusker, who was a journalist, photojournalist, who helped the New Orleans Times-Picayune win 2 Pulitzers because of his work following Hurricane Katrina, who was very damaged emotionally because of what happened after that. And so the film kind of talks about this issue and goes into greater detail and really kind of gives, I think, the viewer a better understanding of what journalists do. I mean, we may be the eyes and ears of society, but in many cases we're also the heartbeat.
I had to come back here a year after Target New Orleans to see if what I'd written was true. Was there really hope here? I was haunted by what Dave Cullen had written about the old man with that big smile. I was told he moved here. Did he leave his old neighborhood because it was a ghost town? I noticed the empty rocking chairs. I wondered if he died of old age or worse yet, of a broken heart. But this was a dead end. He wasn't here.
Well, I think the important thing is people don't recognize that what we see, much of it never ends up on the air or in a newspaper for that matter. And so we're absorbing all of this. And in most of the cases, I talked to Dave Cullen, who covered Columbine, and a lot of reporters who covered a lot of big stories. Penny Cockrell was in Oklahoma City during the Murrah bombing. And I think the one key component is these are all members of the community, and it's the community that's damaged, and so they're damaged in a sense too, and they're so immersed in these stories. For me, 9/11, it was 24/7. When I wasn't covering it, I was watching it on TV or reading it in the newspaper, and you really can't get away from it. Katrina, it wasn't just watching it and reading it, it was actually living it, and that's what was happening to the journalists down there. They couldn't get away from the fact 50% of the people at the Times-Picayune lost their homes. They were going through the exact same thing that the readers were going through.
I can't imagine having to rebuild my house, find a place to stay in the meantime, find a new school for my kids, and all the while go to work and work as hard as we work every day. And so I think journalists helping journalists, you can't say no to that.
When I first got the email suggesting the project, I was just sort of like, okay, where's the catch? Why wouldn't I go?
Well, initially I wanted to just kind of tell the story of John McCusker, who really was struggling after Hurricane Katrina and got into a car chase with police and pleaded with them to kill him. And it was kind of all about his story and what he went through and basically his recovery. But I thought it would be disingenuous just to tell John McCusker's story without telling my own story. So we start with my story basically, and I kind of expose what it was like for me to go through what I went through following the attack on the Pentagon, tell David Hanshu's story, and then get into John McCusker's. But I think the one thing about this film is it's people walk away with it with a good feeling. First, they feel strongly about journalists. We're kind of seen as these vultures that arrive and we ask, how does it feel? That's not journalists. It's a small minority of journalists. And I think they walk away with a better understanding of what we do and what we absorb as the eyes and ears for society. The second thing is, I think people come away recognizing that adversity, it's something that we all have to deal with, and there's growth there as well. And I think that's the one positive takeaway from this is I talk about, how that day affected me, but how I've grown as a result. And this film is an offshoot of that. And what's happened with the film, the coverage. I mean, Ross Bauman, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, the youngest Pulitzer Prize winner in the country, wrote a front page piece in the Washington Times about it. James Rainey, who covers the media here in Los Angeles for the calendar section, is going to write a piece on Friday about this film. And we screened it in Australia. Amanda Mead wrote a big piece for the Australian. This is a story that resonates with journalists too, because they recognize that these are their colleagues and they've seen these stories along the way, but they haven't really recognized why is it this guy's acting this way. And once they see the film, it resonates and they say, wow, I get it. One of the most challenging things about making this film was that I was a full-time Monday through Friday anchor at the CBS station in Washington, D.C. So this was a labor of love, which was squirrel away some time at night and late afternoons, and then work on the weekends and the holidays. And so it was a 2-year project putting this thing together. That was obviously a struggle. But I think through it all, I think it was just, and I guess one of the other struggles for me was revisiting some of this stuff. It was difficult and painful to go back and kind of revisit some of the painful aspects of your life. But as I said before, I think there's growth aspects there as well.
If you want a sign of hope, or perhaps faith, how about this guy? An ice cream truck circling the lower 9th Ward. There are seedlings of hope here. Modest construction underway, something I didn't see a year before. I also wanted to know how John McCusker was doing. Did he ever get that happy ending?
I'm working on a couple of projects right now. Actually, I just finished a short film on a terrific program here in the state of California that helps single moms transition from welfare to work. Just completed that, and I've got a project I'm working on right now about people with rare diseases who are really being shut out of this whole healthcare debate. And I think that's going to be the working title right now, is Shut Out. And I think that has legs and could be a really strong documentary. And then I'm also looking at doing something, again, paying homage to journalists about the RFK award winners. Some of these photojournalists who've done just remarkable work, and I did some interviews with them before I came out here, and I think that's going to end up being a really nice project, and I'm excited to work on that as well.
And the award goes to Breaking News, Breaking Down.
Clearly, I'm astonished at this. I was just delighted to be accepted. I remember I entered in without a box, and I got a note from Dell right away. Wow, this sounds really interesting. And I thought, God, this sounds like a great film festival, and it has been that indeed. And I want to thank John, especially for all those free drink coupons wherever you are. I'd also like to thank my wife, who's here with me tonight. And I'd like to dedicate this to the journalists from New Orleans and those who covered 9/11. Who told their stories for Breaking News, Breaking Down. Thank you very much.